Why is there a second key taped under this old cash register? The fluorescent light above her apartment flickered, buzzing like a warning as she pulled the envelope of last month's Social Security check from the worn leather tote. $211. Only $211 to cover rent, electricity, and a month's worth of groceries for herself. The eviction notice still hung on the front door. The landlord's scrawl bold and unforgiving, "Vacate by the 15th. She set it aside next to the stack of overdue bills. A red-stamped notice of her gas account overdue. An electric bill that had doubled while she slept in restless nights. Under the couch cushions, she found a half-empty bottle of heart medication and a crumpled receipt from the pharmacy she had skipped buying for 2 weeks. Her Ford pickup sat outside, doors frozen shut from the cold morning. The engine wheezing like it too was tired of trying. On the passenger seat, a cardboard box contained the few belongings left after her apartment was cleared. A chipped coffee mug that said "World's Best Mom," a faded photo of her late husband smiling at a town fair, and a worn copy of the grocery store deed she had just purchased. The clerk at the courthouse had tapped her pen impatiently, sliding the document across the table with a polite but unmistakably chilly smile, as if daring her to object. She had signed quietly, leaving fingerprints smudged across the crease, picked up the cardboard box with both hands, and balanced it on her lap while tucking the old brass key into her coat pocket. Even her neighbor, leaning over the chain-link fence, had whispered to her friend with a laugh, calling the store junk that should be bulldozed. She ignored it, counting coins on the kitchen table, a mixture of quarters and dimes that would have to last through the week, noting how each clink sounded sharper than the last. Sliding the deed from the box, she noticed something odd. The name of the parcel had a faint, new-looking ink scribble she hadn't seen before, barely legible next to her husband's handwriting. She frowned, tracing the line with her fingernail, wondering who had touched it and why. Her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of the choice before her. Keep this crumbling, mocked building and all its history, or turn away from the last fragment of autonomy and purpose she had left. The wind rattled the window pane, carrying with it the faint, musty scent of old wood and dust from the store she had yet to step into, and in that moment, the cracked, boarded-up building outside her window didn't look like junk at all. It looked like a final lifeline. The morning of the county auction arrived gray and cold, the sky low and heavy, pressing down on the cracked asphalt parking lot outside the boarded-up grocery store. She clutched the envelope with the last $900 in savings, counting it one more time. $5, $10, $20. Every single bill a measure of courage. Inside the courthouse, the auctioneer's voice rang out, clipped and clinical. Property ID 48,372. Boarded-up grocery store on Main Street. Sold as is. Starting bid $750. He glanced at the bidders with a faint, dismissive smile. One of the lawyers whispered across the room, "It has no market value. Don't waste your time," while a young man at the back muttered under his breath, "Take the dump, lady. Why bother?" She ignored them all, taking a slow, steady breath, her hand raising above the crowd. The clerk handed her a deed packet, but she noticed immediately something odd. The parcel number had been circled in red ink, a fresh mark she hadn't seen on the printed list. The auctioneer's gavel dropped. Sold to the lady in the blue coat, $750. Her fingers tightened around the folded deed, smudging the ink slightly, and she tucked the envelope with her remaining cash into her purse before stepping outside to her old Ford, which groaned as she started the engine. The drive to the grocery store took 4 hours over winding back roads, the kind that smelled of wet leaves and decaying pine. Each mile pressed the weight of judgment and hope onto her shoulders. When she arrived, the building loomed like a forgotten giant, its paint peeling, windows nailed shut, the wooden sign swaying with the wind. She stepped out, counting her steps to the front door, and inserted the key she had just paid $750 to hold onto. It didn't fit the main lock, rattling uselessly, and she tried the small brass key taped beneath the register. Slid in carefully, turning with a click that echoed in the empty store. She felt the chill of the dusty air, the must of old wood and tin, and the echo of every scoff and whispered mockery from earlier that day. Across the street, A man paused mid-stride, eyebrows lifting when he saw her standing alone in front of the store, deed clutched to her chest like a shield, the morning light catching the faded brass of the key. Nobody else had even bid. Developer types had turned and left, shaking their heads at the worthless building. Yet here she was, the last offer accepted, holding the deed and the key, the first step into a place everyone else called junk but which might, she dared to think, be the final chance she had to reclaim something more than property, something alive. And as the wind tugged at the loose boards above the door, she pressed the key to the lock again, unaware that the grocery store had been waiting quietly for her, years untouched, for exactly this moment. She pushed the warped wooden door open, its hinges groaning under the weight of years, and stepped into the dim interior of the grocery store, the air thick with the scent of mildew and old sawdust. Dust coated every surface, sparkling faintly in the thin shafts of morning light slicing through the gaps in the boarded windows. The linoleum floor creaked beneath her worn boots as she lowered the cardboard box onto the uneven ground, the thud echoing off the empty walls. She draped her threadbare coat over her shoulders and began inspecting the outlets, muttering under her breath as she found most dead, their plates cracked and yellowed. A faded calendar hung crookedly above a counter, frozen on May of 2002, a photo of a smiling family peeking through the torn corner. The glass in the display case was shattered, jagged fragments catching the light like splinters of forgotten time, and the counter bore scratches where initials had been carved long ago, the name of her husband faintly etched into the wood. She counted the cans of soup left on a sagging shelf, lining them up neatly, the labels worn and curling, as she tried the old metal locker near the back. Its door was dented and jammed, a rusted padlock refusing to turn with her brass key. Her fingers lingered on the cool metal, noticing a fresh scratch on the floorboards nearby, an unfamiliar groove that ran toward the back wall. A hollow sound echoed when she tapped the panel next to it, a subtle cavity that made her pause. Her eyes followed the uneven paint on the walls, one section noticeably newer, as if someone had patched it but left the old layers untouched. The smell of stale coffee lingered on a counter, a chipped mug lying upside down, and a radio, long silent, sat under the shelves, its cord tangled and frayed. She set her box against the wall and knelt to straighten a bent chair, the vinyl cracked and sticky, and reached for the door of the freezer, noting that it was slightly ajar, a dark gap like a mouth waiting to speak. Somewhere above, a faint scuttle suggested movement, tiny claws or debris falling from a corner, but she saw no animal, only the shadows shifting across the broken floor. She exhaled slowly, letting the quiet hum of the morning fill her ears, and then froze at the soft metallic click behind the counter, subtle but distinct, a reminder that the space had not entirely surrendered its secrets. The metallic click lingered in her mind long after the sound itself disappeared. She stood still for a moment, listening, but the store settled back into silence. Only the wind moved through the cracks in the boards covering the windows, producing a low whistle that drifted across the empty aisles. Finally, she exhaled and went back to work. Whatever secrets this place held, they wouldn't patch a leaking roof or keep her warm at night. She found an old push broom leaning against the stockroom wall and began sweeping. Each pass sent clouds of dust rolling through shafts of sunlight. Broken glass scraped across the floor. Rusted bottle caps rattled into piles. By noon, sweat dampened the collar of her sweater despite the cold. Her knees ached every time she bent down. The arthritis in her hands flared when she gripped the broom too tightly, but she kept moving. She had spent 6 years caring for her husband through heart failure, lifting him in and out of bed, changing dressings, managing medications, learning how to keep going long after her body wanted to stop. Compared to those years, sweeping an abandoned grocery store felt almost familiar. Outside, she dragged a faded blue tarp across a section of roof where rainwater had been leaking through. The tarp had cost $18.99 at a discount hardware store 20 miles away, and paying for it had left her with $143 in her checking account. She knew the exact number because she checked it every morning. $143, a figure small enough to memorize. She climbed a ladder that wobbled with every step and secured the corners with roofing nails she found in a coffee can behind the building. Her left shoe soaked through when she stepped into a puddle. Her phone battery dropped to 4%. The bottle of blood pressure medication in her coat pocket rattled with only a few pills remaining. By late afternoon, she returned inside and sat on an overturned milk crate to eat a can of chicken noodle soup warmed over a camping stove. Rain began tapping softly against the patched roof. The sound was oddly comforting. For a few minutes, she simply listened. Then she noticed something beneath the counter. Wedged between the floor and the baseboard was a yellowed receipt folded into a narrow strip. She reached down and pulled it free. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Grocery items, coffee, bread, milk. But one detail caught her attention. The receipt was dated just 3 months before the store had officially closed. Beneath the total, someone had written a name by hand. Not a customer name she recognized. Not anyone from the old photographs she'd seen. Just 2 words written in blue ink. Walter Finch. She turned the paper over. On the back was another note. See ledger before opening. She frowned. The phrase sounded familiar. Hadn't she seen something similar before? Maybe it had been a reminder left by an employee. Maybe someone had been keeping inventory records. That explanation should have made sense. Except the ink on the receipt looked newer than the paper itself. The paper was brittle and yellow. The writing wasn't faded at all. As the rain continued drumming overhead, she knelt beside the register again. This time, while brushing debris from beneath the counter, her fingers struck something metallic hidden deep inside a crack in the wood. She reached in and pulled out a small brass key coated in dust. It was not the key she had used to enter the building. And it was not the key she had found taped beneath the register. She now held a third key. Slowly, she looked toward the locked drawer beneath the counter. For the first time, she began to wonder whether she wasn't cleaning an abandoned grocery store at all. She might be uncovering something that had been deliberately buried beneath years of dust and neglect. The gravel crunched under slow, deliberate steps as Mr. Henry, the retired fire chief of the town, approached the boarded-up grocery store. His worn boots and grease-stained jacket told stories of decades spent saving lives and fixing machines no one else dared touch. He paused at the door, eyeing the key in her hand, and nodded once, approvingly. "Your father helped people here," he said, his voice low, carrying weight beyond the words. She studied his face, noticing the tight line around his eyes when he mentioned a fire from '98, the memory he was skirting, and the way his hands lingered on the edge of the counter as if sensing the ledger she had found. "Did you know him well?" she asked, leaning slightly forward, holding the key out between them. He exhaled slowly, glancing at the ledger peeking from under the register, and smiled faintly, almost shyly. "I was a boy then, but he never let anyone go hungry. Saw it on those nights when the rain came down like hell and no one had a coat." His fingers brushed the chipped edge of the counter, revealing faint initials scratched there, her father's unmistakable mark. She ran her own finger over them, feeling a pulse of connection, a ghost of the care he had shown. Mr. Henry reached into his coat and produced a small, dented tin bag, offering her a thermos of coffee and a paper sack with fresh bread from his home. "Use the ladder in the back. It's sturdy. Watch the roof. It leaks near the north corner." His glance flicked toward the corner where the wall had been patched recently, a different paint tone than the rest. "Best not ask too much about that night," he murmured, voice dropping. She tilted her head, curious, sensing something untold, and followed him around the counter, noting that the brass key she had retrieved earlier fit perfectly into the old padlock on the supply closet he pointed out. The ledger page she had found bore his name, faint but visible, linking him to her father's quiet acts of generosity. He lingered for a moment by a framed, dust-covered photograph of a smiling family, one face partially cropped out, and her gaze followed. "Some things were meant for the right eyes," he said softly, eyes meeting hers, just long enough for her to understand. She folded the paper receipt from the hardware store into her pocket, heart hammering with the knowledge that the store wasn't just a roof over her head. It was alive with the memory and protection her father had left behind, and Mr. Henry's presence confirmed it. As he walked back toward the gate, His eyes flicked toward the cracked glass of the front display, and she caught a glimpse of something glinting beneath the register. A hint that the place held more than just shelves and counters, a heartbeat from a past that had been waiting for someone to notice. The rain had eased to a soft patter on the patched roof, tapping a slow rhythm that echoed through the empty aisles. She knelt beside the freezer again, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand, sweeping its beam over the cracked tiles and the chipped baseboards. The hollow sound when she tapped the side of the freezer drew her attention. The metal responded differently in one corner, dull instead of the familiar clang. Kneeling lower, she traced the edge with her fingers, finding a narrow groove that ran from the back of the freezer to the far wall, a faint scratch in the dust leading like a guide. She pulled the freezer forward a few inches, the floorboards creaking in protest, revealing a section of the floor that was newer than the rest, nailed down differently, the wood less worn. Her breath caught. Someone had repaired this space. Deliberately but not recently, someone who wanted it hidden. She crouched to examine a small wall panel just above the floor, the paint slightly glossier than the surrounding plaster, and pushed gently with her palm. It gave a hair's breadth, a subtle shift that made her heart skip. A thread of electrical wire ran along the base, leading to nothing, cut and capped off, as if someone had unplugged whatever it had once powered. She grabbed a screwdriver from her pocket and tried to unscrew the lock on a dented locker in the corner. The screws weren't aligned with the lock, as if installed by hands unfamiliar with the original layout. She paused, listening to the soft hum of the fridge in the back and the low whistle of the wind under the boards, letting herself consider benign explanations. Perhaps previous repairs, perhaps misplaced keys, perhaps misaligned shelving. But the scratch on the floor continued under her palm, tracing a deliberate path to the wall, the panel shifting just enough to suggest more than a coincidence. Her eyes followed it along the baseboards toward a corner where the light barely reached, and the soft creak of the floor under her knee seemed to echo a question. Had someone been moving things here recently, or had the building itself preserved a secret too stubborn to fade? She crouched, running her fingers along the groove one more time, and saw a faint outline on the wall where paint had been reapplied, forming a subtle rectangle. Just above it, a small nail bent at an odd angle caught the glint of her flashlight, marking a hidden panel or door. A shiver ran down her spine. The pattern of scratches, the wire ending abruptly, the misaligned lock, the newer floorboard, the painted rectangle. It all pointed to something intentionally concealed. She held the flashlight tighter, tracing the outline with her eyes, and realized that the building wasn't merely abandoned. It had been waiting, meticulously, for someone who would notice. She knelt on the cold, dusty floor, flashlight in one hand and screwdriver in the other, staring at the panel with the faint rectangle of newer paint. The wood gave just enough under her prying tool to creak, and a whisper of stale air escaped from the tiny gap. She eased the panel outward, revealing a narrow compartment, the edges splintered and coated in years of grime. Inside lay a small leather-bound ledger, its spine cracked, corners frayed, and faint coffee stains marring the first few pages. The leather smelled faintly of old varnish and dust, a whisper of her father's hand when he had last held it decades ago. She slid a glove over her hand and lifted it slowly, balancing it on her knee. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, slightly slanted, with dates that didn't always line up. July 12, 2001. May 4, 1998. Each entry ending with the word forgiven scrawled across debts long thought forgotten. She traced one line with her finger and froze. A name she recognized immediately, faint but unmistakable, Walter Finch, the same name scribbled on the receipt she had found earlier. Her breath caught. The address listed matched the grocery store's parcel number, linking it to the very building she now sat in. She folded the ledger carefully, running her thumb across a faded signature that had been edited, overwritten, almost hidden, and tucked it into the inside pocket of her coat, holding it against her chest as her mind raced. Questions bubbled in her head. Why had her father recorded these debts in secret? Who else knew about this ledger? And why had someone taken the trouble to hide it so deliberately behind a painted panel? She could almost hear the scratch of pen on paper from years past, the quiet diligence of a man protecting his town. The rain drummed softly against the patched roof, each beat a reminder of time passing and secrets lingering. She leaned back, letting the flashlight fall across the cracked floorboards, and snapped a quick photo of the ledger with her old phone, careful to keep the device in her coat pocket, hidden from any passers-by. A faint whisper of wind made the pages flutter slightly, revealing a single line in the handwriting. Ruth Mlin, Route 11, Goshen County. Her pulse quickened. The ledger, the hidden compartment, even the odd receipt all pointed here, to her family. The realization settled like a weight in her chest. The grocery store was not just a building. It was a vessel, a carefully preserved record meant for her eyes, and her eyes alone. The ledger rested open on her lap long after the rain stopped. The store had fallen quiet again, the kind of deep rural silence that only arrived after dark. A single camping lantern cast a pool of amber light across the counter while shadows stretched through the empty aisles. She turned another page carefully, afraid the brittle paper might tear beneath her fingers. The handwriting was unmistakable. Even after all these years, she recognized the way her husband curved the letter R and crossed his TS with a heavy stroke. For a moment, she wasn't sitting in an abandoned grocery store. She was back in their small kitchen 20 years earlier, watching him balance receipts after dinner, while the smell of coffee and machine oil lingered on his work shirt. She swallowed hard and kept reading. The entries were not business records. Not really. Beside names were notes written in smaller script. Lost husband in factory accident. No charge until spring. Children need winter coats. Paid anonymously. Prescription covered. Tell her church fund helped. Her fingers stopped moving. She stared at the page. Again and again the same pattern appeared. Debts crossed out. Payments forgiven. Grocery accounts erased. The deeper she read, the less the ledger looked like a record of money and the more it looked like a map of quiet mercy. Tucked between two pages, she found a folded envelope yellowed with age. The seal had never been broken. Carefully, she opened it. Inside was a photograph. A faded Polaroid showed 3 children sitting on the store's front steps sometime in the early 1990s. Behind them stood her husband, smiling awkwardly at the camera. On the back, written in blue ink, were 6 words. They never knew who helped. She lowered the photo slowly. The smell of old paper mixed with the scent of dust and rain-soaked wood around her. For years she had believed she knew the man she married. She knew the long hours, the tired hands, the stubborn pride. But this version of him felt almost unfamiliar. A man who had quietly carried entire families, without ever speaking about it. The next morning, she drove to Henry's house. The retired fire chief opened the door before she could knock twice. When she showed him the photograph, something shifted behind his eyes. He stared at it for several seconds before looking away. "I remember those kids," he said quietly. "Their father got hurt at the mill." He paused. Nobody knew how they made it through that winter. She waited. Henry rubbed his jaw. "Your husband wasn't the kind of man who wanted credit." "Then why hide all this?" she asked. Henry's expression tightened. For the first time, he seemed uncomfortable. He looked toward the road before answering. Some people didn't like what he was doing. The words landed heavily between them. "Who?" she asked. Henry was silent for several moments. Finally, he shook his head. "There are names that still make trouble in this town." He turned and walked into the kitchen. When he returned, he carried a small bundle of papers tied together with a faded rubber band. "Found these years ago after the flood." She accepted them carefully. Old receipts, church donation records, pharmacy invoices, each one connected somehow to names she had already seen in the ledger. Then one document caught her attention. It was a county property notice dated 15 years earlier. Across the bottom sat a familiar signature from a local development company. The same company that had recently tried to buy the grocery store before she ever opened the front door. Henry noticed her reaction immediately. "That's the name I didn't want to say." She looked down at the paper again. Suddenly the abandoned building felt different. Less forgotten. More abandoned on purpose. As she gathered the records, A smaller folded note slipped from the stack. It contained only a single sentence in her husband's handwriting. If you're reading this, Ruth, don't stop here. You're finally looking where they never wanted you to look. The sun had begun to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the grocery store floor, making the dust motes dance in the lantern light. She held the ledger close, flipping carefully through the pages as the rain began again, tapping on the patched roof. Each name she read was connected to a deed, a receipt, or a handwritten note tucked into the folds, proof that her husband had not only forgiven debts but had quietly established a network of support across the county. Her fingers traced a parcel number in the ledger, and she grabbed the deed from the coat pocket, matching the numbers to the county maps spread on the counter. They aligned perfectly, confirming the grocery store was tied to land easements she had never imagined, its property stretching beyond the visible building into hidden parcels with mineral rights and trust accounts in her husband's name. Heart pounding, she realized the store's value wasn't cash. It was justice, the legacy of her husband's integrity, a sanctuary for the families he protected, and a record that could undo decades of neglect. She photographed the ledger pages with her phone, noting the names, dates, and signatures, and placed them carefully in her coat. Outside, the crunch of gravel made her glance up. A black SUV idled across the street. No Platz. She froze, heart hammering, and a phone call buzzed. Unknown caller. She ignored it, focusing on the old bank envelope she had found in the back office. Peeling it open to reveal a check and a note referencing a community fund set up by her husband decades ago. The handwriting was unmistakable, the ink smudged in spots where he had held it tight. A breeze rattled the broken sign outside, and she realized for the first time that this building wasn't just abandoned. Someone wanted it. Developer calls, county clerks asking questions she hadn't invited, letters arriving in her mailbox warning about unsafe property. Each polite phrase masking intent to take what she now understood was invaluable. She ran her fingers over the ledger again, comparing entries to receipts and old photographs of families her husband had helped, confirming connections, finding discrepancies where taxes had never been filed because he had quietly paid them himself. And then the sound of footsteps on the gravel outside made her spin. A man she recognized from the auction, the one who had laughed when she raised her hand to bid, was walking toward the door, coat collar high, expression polite but unreadable. Her stomach twisted. The grocery store was no longer junk. It was a key to her husband's legacy, a living record of hidden acts of protection and generosity, and someone had come to claim it. The soft echo of her flashlight bouncing off the walls was broken by the deliberate click of the front door. The man from the auction stepped inside, polished shoes scuffing the dust, and in his hand, a folder thick with documents. "Ruth," he said calmly, his voice smooth as ice. "I'm just trying to make sure you understand the fairness of this property. It's valuable, more than you realize, and frankly, unsafe if not properly managed." She clutched the ledger tighter, sliding it under her coat. His eyes flicked to the brass key she held, then back to the deed on the counter. "Family property," he added, opening the folder to reveal a purchase agreement, deadlines stamped in red, and a notarized petition implying she might be unable to maintain the store. "Sign quickly, or the county can initiate a lien." "It's only procedure," he said, with the precision of a man used to keeping people in check. She inhaled slowly, counting the money left in her pocket, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the ledger, resisting the urge to hand over the deed. Her phone vibrated, an unknown number flashing. She ignored it, taking a deep breath and photographing every page of the ledger, every signature on the petition, every line of the county form. Across the counter, he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that acknowledged he had underestimated her until now. "I suppose you don't see it yet," he murmured. "What a mistake it would be to hold this property." She didn't answer, instead flipping through the ledger and noticing a page she had missed before. A faintly torn edge, a handwritten note that included the name of a long-forgotten witness, someone who could verify every debt cleared and every act her husband had carried out quietly. Her heartbeat quickened as she realized that while he had the law on his side, he did not yet know she had that evidence. The man straightened, tapping the folder against the counter. Voice smooth. Consider your options, Ruth. The window closes soon. She slid the ledger into her coat pocket, stood slowly, and held her ground. Outside, rain spattered against the patched roof, masking the soft click of another car pulling into the gravel lot. The moment was clear. He knew the grocery store was valuable, and now he was making his move. But she had something he hadn't accounted for. A piece of proof that could change everything. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old carpet, the kind of scent that made time feel heavier. She entered the hearing room carrying the ledger tucked under her arm, the folded bank envelope with the trust account details in her hand, and the deed pressed flat against her chest. The developer sat at the head of the table, papers spread in front of him, a polished pen hovering above a contract he expected her to sign. Ruth, we're simply following procedure, he said smoothly, leaning back. You may not fully understand the liabilities here. She placed the ledger on the table first. The room went quiet as the pages slid open, revealing names, dates, amounts forgiven, and the hand-scrawled "forgiven" stamped across every entry. The clerk across the room leaned in, comparing them to the county files, nodding slightly. She then unfolded the bank envelope, revealing a letter confirming that her husband had established a community fund. The signatures verified, the dated seal unbroken for decades. The developer's smile faltered. These are procedural anomalies, he said, tapping the deed in front of him, voice steady. Ruth reached for the deed she held, laying it atop the county's copy, the parcel numbers matching perfectly, every signature accounted for, the paper crisp against the worn ledger. Check the timestamp on the ledger entries, she said softly, glancing at the county clerk who produced the official record. The entries predated the developer's claims by years. A hush fell over the room. She pulled out the photo from the hidden envelope, showing her husband with children on the store steps, the image matching ledger names and bank records. Mr. Henry, the retired fire chief, stood beside her, confirming details she had already uncovered, each nod adding weight. The developer opened his mouth again, attempting to argue safety codes and risk to property. But Ruth held up the ledger to the light. The ink, the signatures, and the folded notes all told a story he could not deny. His hand froze midair above the contract, pen suspended, his practiced composure cracking. She watched as he went pale, then silent, and realized that the room was no longer under his control. The documents, once dismissed as junk, had become shields, proof, and the voice of her late husband speaking from the past. Ruth leaned back, feeling the shift in power, the weight of legitimacy settling over the table. Outside, rain tapped softly against the courthouse windows, echoing the rhythm of her heartbeat. She allowed herself a measured breath, knowing she had won this battle, but the ledger, the deed, and the envelope lay in front of her, each a choice yet to be made, a legacy waiting to be honored, and a responsibility to the families her husband had protected that was just beginning. Morning sunlight streamed through the cracked windows, dust particles dancing like golden motes in the warm light as she turned the key in the refurbished lock one last time. The brass gleamed, polished carefully over the previous nights, no longer a simple piece of metal but a symbol of persistence, of battles fought in silence. The deed, once folded, crumpled, and doubted, had been officially amended at the county office, its signatures verified, the parcel now unmistakably hers. Petitions challenging her ownership had been dismissed, the developer's polite smirk replaced by reluctant acknowledgement, while the community, drawn by word of her perseverance, began arriving with paintbrushes, ladders, and warm casseroles. Ledger pages, previously hidden beneath dust, now lay open behind a protective glass on the counter, each forgiven, inked entry a testament to the care and justice her husband had quietly sown. A small envelope from the old bank trust account had been opened and distributed, establishing a community fund for families in need, echoing the decades-old promise recorded in his handwriting. She hung the faded photo of her husband above the counter, where children of the neighborhood could see his smile, a silent witness to the generosity that had been nearly erased. The broken floorboards were replaced, shelves straightened, windows patched with new glass that caught the morning sun, and the familiar smell of coffee from a small pot simmering on the back counter filled the air. The first customer, an elderly neighbor, stepped inside, smiling and saying, "Welcome home, Ruth." And she realized in that moment that home was more than a building. It was a place where history, integrity, and community converged. Outside, the black SUV from before had departed, its intent foiled by the undeniable proof of care, legality, and legacy, leaving the gravel lot quiet except for the soft chirp of morning birds. She knelt briefly to brush her hand along the polished ledger, feeling the weight of every forgiven debt and every unseen kindness, a tangible affirmation that she had never been powerless, never been without worth. Her eyes lifted to the open front door, where sunlight illuminated the counter, the key resting atop it, the brass warm and solid in the morning, and for the first time in decades, the grocery store was no longer a derelict, no longer a junk building, but a living testament, a diorama of patience, sacrifice, and love finally entrusted to the right hands, ready to nourish those who would enter. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering leaves across the parking lot, and she stepped forward, letting the door swing gently closed behind her, the sound echoing softly as if the building itself exhaled relief, welcoming its caretaker home.